Why do you say treasury companies scare you? Do you think they could lead to just a huge crash because there's no real value?
I always think their value is whatever the value of the Bitcoin they hold is. The reason I think for the average person worldwide should just stay the hell away from them is because they're probably not smart enough to do enough of the due diligence and the homework and really understand what they're getting. But what they're really getting is an operating company with risk, management, infrastructure, overhead, and personnel that is less efficient than just owning the Bitcoin. You get regulatory risk, SEC filing risk. You get risk to credit and traditional things that companies have to deal with across debt and equity and hybrid capitalization structures. Even worse, when you're doing treasury companies that are originated as a special purpose acquisition company like a SPAC, you're inheriting dilution. You're inheriting all sorts of ugly equity that someone else paid zero for to get the warrants on the SPAC. The people who put the money into a trust that were basically parking their money to get their 2% management fee, their 20% return, and then they may or may not leave the cash in the SPAC when it does the merger. Then you're also getting the regulatory risk when the merger is announced, that 6 to 9 month window, they're going to be able to get all the audits. The SEC is going to approve them. They're going to start trading. So I watch all these people like they're buying, Mike Alfred made an investment. So what happened in ASST as a ticker symbol, right? It went from, he bought in the 85 to 95% range. He bought 1 million shares. So he invests like $1 million. It jumps 50% over the last 48 hours. But why does that matter? I mean, okay, so you have people controlling warrants who have a cost basis of zero. Anything above a penny, they can dump on those folks. People that already bought up here at these much higher prices are now seeing a surge, they can dump. So all that really matters is like, what's the MNAV? And why would you be paying a premium with all that operational and regulatory and filing risk when all you have to do is just buy Bitcoin or a Bitcoin ETF and you get none of that?
That makes a lot of sense. It's so fun because I've watched Bitcoin so closely, but I never invested. I mean, I had Sailor on my podcast and I never bought strategy. Probably was a mistake, but still, I just want to be as pure, as cold as possible in Bitcoin and own it myself. Like that's the pure play, even if it means that I might miss out on like some additional gain,
Yeah,
but I'm not
and
interested in
there's an
that.
important point in this. So, like what Sailor did and strategy and all the preferreds they've offered, they basically created a Bitcoin yield curve, right? That replaces a traditional yield curve. Now, there are exceptions to every rule. So, like, let's say my mom is retired and she has whatever she has. Let's just say I'll use $1 million for easy math. If you're retired and you've built $1 million over your lifetime, and now you're going to retire, I could make the case that it's much better for my mom to buy STRC and get a monthly dividend that's annualized at 10%. And if she doesn't want to have any exposure to the equity markets whatsoever, and she just wants to live off 10% per year or $100,000 US per year, she could buy effectively a preferred security that's pegged between $99 and $101. And instead of getting, 3% in a savings account or 2% in a certificate of deposit or a treasury, which, is dropping in value of some bond, whether it's corporate bonds or otherwise, she could just say, hell, I'm going to get a triple improvement on my savings rate. There's a little bit of risk, of course, but at least there's assets pledged against it. So I can understand where someone goes, if I'm going to get 3% on my cash in a money market, but I can get 10%, I have instant liquidity if I want to get out of it, and I can get paid once a month on that 10% interest. I can understand the logic of like, why would I want to own that? in that group of $7 trillion out there that is in money market accounts. Cash is horrible. Money markets are just as bad. Certificates of deposit are bad. Bonds are bad. So what are you going to do? I think you have to invest in markets, of course, but a lot of people feel like they're taking that big risk when they're retired or older. I think the actual rate of inflation is the rate of return of the S&P 500 or the NASDAQ 100, because the S&P 500 and the NASDAQ 100 go up or down effectively almost 100% correlated with the M2 money supply. The more money they print, the more the assets go up in value, not because they're worth more, but the currency's worth less. So I use the rate of inflation. I don't listen to what the government announcement is. I think they're lying all over the world. Every country lies what the actual inflation rate is. But what they can't lie about is how much money they printed. And that gets reflected in often the price of physical assets like real estate and in the stock market. So if you say, hey, the NASDAQ is up 10% this year, that just means that they printed 10% that they added to the money supply, and that is your inflation rate. When I calculate inflation, I believe it's more like 25%. The Fed target in the United States is 2%. All of that is just what degree of theft can I get away with to steal your money without you, committing crimes and anarchy and all this other kind of stuff that goes with it. But that social contract has been broken badly. So the 2% the Fed focuses on, the 25% I think exist. If it was 2%, because math, over 50 years, if you work from age 20 to 70, you're going to lose 50% of your wealth during those 50 years that you work if inflation is really 2%. That's how the math works. But since 2020 through 2025, we've actually seen inflation, I think 25, let's say we split the middle at 14%. That means you and I lost half our wealth in the last 5 years because math. That's the profound difference between 2% and 14%, means you lost half your wealth identically, but one was over 50 years and one was over 5 years. An order of magnitude worse. So the hurdle rate is I need Bitcoin because I need something that's growing faster than what I think is 25% per year. And if it's growing at 30 to 50%, it has a lot of volatility, but at least I'm preserving my purchasing power. But if you're working and you get anything less than at least a 14% raise per year, you're not even treading water. You're just losing money. You go from 50,000 to 57,000 and you think, hey, I got a 14% raise. I'm like, well, you're treading water. Nothing got better in your life whatsoever. Now, there's an exception when you're younger. I do this. All my kids who are 23 to 26, their W-2 payroll from their job doesn't go to their bank. It goes to Strike, and it instantly gets converted to Bitcoin. And then once a month, they use the bill pay feature of Strike to pay off. But as the price of Bitcoin's going up, they end up selling less and less Bitcoin. Every 2 weeks, their paycheck gets processed and they dollar cost average into more Bitcoin. And over time, their Bitcoin stack is getting bigger. The value of that stack is getting bigger. The amount of Bitcoin they're selling gets smaller. And my kids, since they started doing it when Bitcoin was probably $80,000, as we're close to like getting like 120, that's like a 50% reduction in their cost of living.
That's Yeah, it's amazing because once you look at like the real inflation rate, celebrating a 5 or 10% salary seems ridiculous, and it seems even more ridiculous if you save in dollars and not in assets. It's like a double edge of like you want to save in Bitcoin, and you want to have an increase of your salary or like raise or like or grow your company or like whatever you do higher than the this 14%, and then you're actually doing double good in terms of that, and not double bad than what the average
Exactly.
person is doing.
And it's completely unfair to younger generations because, like in the United States, our debt just hit $38 trillion. What is that? That's like make believe. So not only 38 trillion, but the last $1 trillion was added literally since August. So September, October. Oh my God. We haven't had 3 full months and we just added another $1 trillion. Meanwhile, the US government has to refinance $10 trillion of debt of that 38 trillion that's due this year, because when Biden Harris were leaving office, they decided to ram through as much fake liquidity as possible before the election, hoping they could beat Trump. And they did really bad deals all the way throughout last year. And then Besson and Trump inherit all this short-term debt that needs to be turned over, and there's 10 trillion of it. So I assure you, interest rates are going to go down, and they're going to go down by force if they have to, because Trump and Besson are not going to keep signing up for $100 billion a month of interest on $1.2 trillion of interest per year. And this 10 trillion, they're like, we're going to drive interest rates down no matter how hot inflation is, because we need to refinance all the debt and then we can go back to printing, and they're going to run the economy hot. And we got midterms next year and they're going to go full bore. And as we've seen since the tariffs came out, tariffs are deflationary, not inflationary. And they already could actually cut the IRS and taxation out of the United States for everyone who lives here today. Already 80% roughly of the United States citizens could pay zero, and the tariffs would perfectly offset that. And by the end of this year, I expect that'll already be at 100%. And tariffs were the way that the United States funded the government before the creation of the Federal Reserve under sketchy circumstances in 1913. We had more money, less debt, a balanced budget before 1913 throughout our history, when we just used tariffs. And that was the simple thing, because the dirty secret is globalist corporations, which are the Fortune 500, Fortune 5000. They're playing comparative advantage all over the world, and they're trying to screw over one country versus another country to drive down the cost of employment, drive down the cost of regulation, drive down the cost of every aspect of their business. And they're not United States companies or German companies. They may say they are, but they might have been founded there. But BMW and Mercedes and everybody out of Germany are no different than Google and Apple and Netflix and everyone in the United States. They care about the world and their revenue and customers offset by their cost structure, which is why we see all these stupid policies of illegal immigration on purpose, H-1B visas. Everything is designed to destroy humanity in every country worldwide. It is absolutely mind-numbing that the goal is bankers up here, all of their stack of money and relationships and cronyism, and then they use central banks, not Bitcoin, as the money to then get principal and interest against the world across everything they touch, and then they get taxed to death everywhere. And what humanity is starting to do, excuse the French, is say, fuck you. That's what they're saying. We're done. No more. We're done. You want to tax me in London? I'm going to Dubai. You want to tax me here? I'll go to Portugal. People are just saying, I did not work my butt off to be exploited. I did not start from zero, get to something, and you're going to tax me when I work. You're going to tax me when I spend. You're going to tax me when I'm sick. You're going to tax me when I die. You're going to take from my children, from my family, and you just want it all pushed up to you. And the answer is fuck you. No more. No more. We opt out. You and I opt out with Bitcoin, but we also opt out with where we choose to live. I left California years ago for Texas, because why do I want to pay state taxes when I can come to Texas and pay zero state taxes? I could go to Florida, pay zero. A lot of folks that over in Europe, where are they going? Dubai, Abu Dhabi, the UAE. They're saying, bye-bye. You're going to tax me 50, 60, 70, 80%. All the entrepreneurs of Europe say, yeah, I've had enough. Goodbye. Because capital doesn't have to stay there. But what's amazing, let's use the perfect example. A famous international celebrity, George Clooney and his wife, right? What did they do? They come to the United States, they live in the United States, they make all their money. They play political activists for the left. They push all these policies in California, destroy every aspect of life in California. And then what did he do? They pick up, take their wealth, and run to Italy. And they're going to raise their family in Italy because they don't want to live with the consequences of the horrific actions that they advocated for while they were being paid off to be a useful idiot for the system. And it's the same way everywhere. Create all the problems and then bail to Texas or Florida in the United States. And then what am I going to do? Oh, we're going to try to advocate for the same policies in Texas and Florida that didn't work in California. We moved here for less crime, a better life, better education, better place to raise our kids. But no, now let's try to do the same thing because it'll scale in Texas or in Florida, even though it failed miserably, much like communism and socialism fails miserably around the world. And meanwhile, we're watching New York City about to elect a guy who's never worked a day in his life, who's part of a lucky sperm club, who's an intelligence asset being placed into New York City to give away everything for free so that all the illegals there will keep voting because this is how we're supposed to blow up all Western nations, right? It's funny. Immigration. It's fine to destroy every country except for Israel or China. We see where the immigration is happening. My favorite ruling last week out of Sweden, a rapist gets let go because the rape didn't last long enough. So as a father of 7, 5 daughters, 23 to 26, if that happened, oh my God, we wouldn't need the judicial system. I would go after them myself. Because the idea, Robin, you get married, you have children, your daughter is raped, and the judicial system tells you, well, Robin, it's okay. She wasn't raped long enough. Yeah, okay, sure. That's fuck you. That's the answer.
There's been a similar case actually in Austria where, and I don't remember why they got let free, but it was actually a group of people. It was not only like one; it was like 3 or 4, if I remember correctly. So like it's hard. Like you always hear that, and you think like, oh, like that's just like a made up story, and then you're like, oh, that actually happened. Like those things, like it is outrageous. Like it's so outrageous that you don't even want to believe it. It's crazy.
Yeah, and I mean, you looked at the cover up for decades in England, the rape and grooming gangs, a real thing. And the problem is that much like pedophilia and all these other horrific acts, that rational, normal people, you and I would go, come on, no one really does this. No, there are satanic pedophiles in charge. There are people who hate you, who want you dead, who want your children dead, and no one anywhere in the world knowingly brings random ethnicities and religions and mass immigration into every place unless you're trying to kill it, unless the goal is to have blatant criminality. And it's done on purpose to have people's morale destroyed. I'm going to bring people in and I'm going to give more protection to the criminals than the victims. And in fact, if you object or speak out about it, we're going to arrest you for daring to call out the fact that someone was a criminal or that someone was raped or that someone was killed. And it's just gaslighting. And it's like Netflix. They'll have some historical issue and they will recast it. And suddenly you'll have all these characters that are trans, gay. Of course, then it'll be a black guy married to a white woman. Of course, it will then be the villain is white. They'll just invert reality and they'll push it through television, radio, and every single bit of content you see to gaslight you right to your face and act like it's normal. Or they'll say, hey, we have a term for that. It's minor attracted person. And you're like, no, that's a pedophile. Or someone was arrested for inappropriate conduct with a child. You're like, look, when a child is 4, that's called rape. That is called sexual assault. And there should be horrific consequences. And so when people are trying to recreate the world to get group A to hate group B and group C to fight with group D, and to get Muslims to fight Christians and to get blacks to fight whites, this is all just created specifically to infuriate the world, fight amongst themselves while all the wealth and power is stolen, which always gets us back to Bitcoin, because Bitcoin is peace, Bitcoin is love, Bitcoin starves the money printer so you can't have war. And Bitcoin provides that the most dangerous type of men and women on earth, sovereign individuals who take full accountability and responsibility for themselves, their actions, their family, who want to have a traditional family unit, raise their children, and create good citizens for the world.
Thank you for watching this video. This was only a snippet of the podcast. And if you want to watch the full episode and get all of the context of this episode, you can click right here or here. Oh, maybe also here.